Good Shabbos, Hashanah Tovah. Just knowing that you are joining in to our service, our minyan without walls, lifts me up in a time of distress. We are challenged, all of us, in many different ways. And in spite of a hurricane, firestorms, a pandemic, and many other challenges, you are still joining in. And you are declaring that Jewish life and Jewish time matter to you, your family, your community, and to our shul. If you have a tallis at the ready, I ask you to prepare to put the tallis on. Pardon me. And a gentle reminder, yes, you are at home, but we're in a prayer service. So, gentlemen, you're encouraged to put on a yarmulke or a hat. And ladies, if it's your custom to wear a yarmulke or a kippah, please feel free to do so at this time. And I'm reminded as we are about to put the tallis on, we have a garment and we have these small strings. And often you and I look at the garment and say, oh, what a lovely garment. And we look at the garment itself and we might forget about the edges. But the essence of a tallis for over 1,000 years has not been the elaborate garment or the weaving or the color. The emphasis for the past 1,000 years that we've had tallis, arising from the first element of strings 3,000 years ago, has always been what's on the edge. And in my mind, that means to reach out to those who are on the edge. Jewish people who are distanced or separated. And that speaks especially loudly for all of us today, in these times. And by reaching out to those on the edge, we fulfill holiness. The blessing is, Lihita teif b'tzitzit, join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, Lihita teif b'tzitzit. And if you have a Machzor, we begin on page 35. It's the English. It's a bracha, a blessing. Officially, folks, when we say a certain passage in the prayer book is a bracha, it means that it either begins or ends with Baruch Atah. Some bracha would actually begin and end with Baruch Atah. Sometimes the paragraph is very long, spanning a number of pages. Sometimes it's just a one-liner. This is a short paragraph. The soul. The soul that you, my God, have given me is pure. You created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me. You keep body and soul together. One day you will take my soul from me to restore it to me, to maintain it in life eternal. That is Olam Haba, the next world. So long as this soul is within me, I acknowledge you, Adonai, my God, my ancestors' God, master of all creation, sovereign of all souls, Baruch Atah Adonai, who restores the soul to the lifeless body. And yes, this paragraph teaches that God establishes a soul in each and every person. And what takes my breath away every single morning is that although, of course, it's written in Hebrew, it doesn't say Jewish people have souls. It says everyone has a soul. And in the phrase, one day you will restore my soul to me in life eternal, which refers to the Jewish belief that there is a realm of experience beyond this one. And when we die, the physicality of our life ends, but there's an essence that transcends. From the Jewish perspective, all people have that capacity or that quality of transcending the physical reality. Written in Hebrew, a Jewish prayer 2,000 years old, contemporary today, teaches that all human beings are essential, sacred, and their souls are beautiful in the eyes of God. And that's how we begin every single morning service. If you're able to rise, I ask you to do so. On page 37, the Birchot HaShachar, the early morning blessings. And some have a prayer book, a Machzor, and some don't. And if you don't know these words, you can just say Amen. Every one of these blessings, these brachot, is guiding us in our daily lives. The first one, for you, O God, taught animals and people to distinguish between day and night. Number one puts forth the message that you and I are interdependent with animals, and we share a habitat. That's the first bracha of the morning. And the second message is that if you and I can differentiate between day and night, then consider other polarities, good and bad, right and wrong, caring, abuse. That's how we start our day, reminding us of what we can do to make this day a day of wholeness. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lesek vivino lavchim ben yom u'ben layla. Amen. If you don't know the prayer, you can just say Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani Yisrael. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani ben chorin. The next sentence is Pokeach Yivrim. God, you open the eyes. When I open my eyes this morning, what do I see? How do I look at the world? And how do I respond? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pogeach ivrim. The next sentence, Malbish Aramim, clothing the naked. Perhaps one of the responses is recognizing that there are people in need, and I need to respond and help clothe the naked. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Malbish Aramim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Matir Asurim. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Zokev Kifufim. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Rokar etzal hamayim. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shasali kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hamechi mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hanotem la'ev koach. Blessed are you, God, our God, ruler of time and space, who removes sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids. Even a small, we might think, inconsequential act of just removing the little bit of schmutz from our eyes and opening our eyes as we begin the day can be attributed to God. And so God is this close as you and I, when we touch our own eyes to wake up. Aren't we aware of what it means to be in presence with the eternal every single moment and to walk about the world? You may be seated. On page number 44, this is the psalm associated with this month of the year. Actually, it's about 6.5 weeks. We started a month ago, every morning and evening, Psalm number 27, until the middle of Sukkot. LeDavid of David, Adonai Ori v'yishi mimi ira. God is my light and my help. Whom shall I fear? Adonai is the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evil people assail me to devour my flesh, it is they, my enemies, and those who besiege me, who stumble and fall. Should an armed camp be arrayed against me, my heart would show no fear. Should they war against me, of this I would be sure. First element, talking about fear of hostile forces. And now, one thing I ask about Adonai, this I seek, to dwell in the house of God all the days of my life, to behold God's beauty, and to visit in God's sanctuary, were God to hide me in God's sukkah on the calamitous day, were God to enfold me in the secret recesses of God's tent, I would be raised up in a protecting fort. Now I raise my head above the enemies that surround me, and I come with offerings amidst trumpet blasts to God's tent, chanting and singing praise to Adonai. Adonai, hear my voice as I cry out. Be gracious to me and answer me. It is you of whom my heart said, seek my face. Seek my face. It is your presence that I seek, Adonai. And this next tone has been what? A sense of closeness and relief and satisfaction and happiness. Not happy birthday happy, a different kind of happy. That the person is close to God. And yet, do not hide your face from me. Do not act angrily toward me, God. A sense of feeling separated and distant from God. How do we understand first happiness and satisfaction, closeness, and now a sense of feeling distant? And my response is, are there ever points in our lives that you and I feel ambivalent? Sometimes happy, sometimes concerned, sometimes confident, sometimes filled with self-doubt? Why do we recite this psalm a month before Rosh Hashanah and on through Yom Kippur and into Sukkot? Because that's the nature of who we are. And as we're trying to restart our lives, our spiritual year, we take into account the ambivalences, the joys, the confusion, the fear, the delight, the promise, the anxiety. The last line. If only I could trust that I would see God's goodness, if only. The sense of, again, ambivalence, uncertainty. And then the last line, place your hope in Adonai, be strong, take courage, and place your hope in Adonai. The psalmist is speaking to each one of us and saying, in effect, it's natural for us to be concerned, confused, of mixed thought and feeling. Reach inside yourself and take hold of what Judaism espouses, not taking it for granted by any means. That you are handmade by the same Creator that fashioned galaxies and stars and laws of physics. And in those moments of self-doubt, remember that you matter to the universe and even beyond the universe. Page 47. Baruch She'amar, speaking of the universe, God spoke and the world came into being. Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar v'ya'olam. Baruch hu. Baruch Osev Reshit. Baruch Omer v'yoseh. Baruch Gozer Makayim. Baruch Merachem al Haaretz. Baruch Merachem al Riyot. Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov Lireyav. Baruch Chaylad V'Kayim Lo Netzach. Baruch Podem Atzil. Baruch Shemo. On the English. Baruch Atadonai, our God, ruler of time and space, compassionate Creator, extolled by your people, glorified by your faithful servants. We laud you with the psalms of your servant David. We extol you in song. We celebrate your fame in melody. We proclaim you sovereign, singular, eternal God. Baruch Atadonai, sovereign, extolled with songs of praise. Yachid Cheolamim, Melech Mishubachim Fawar, Adeh Shmo Gadol, Baruch Atadonai, Melech Molo, Batish Brachot. Israel exists not in order to be, but in order to dream the dream of God. Our faith on occasion may be strained, but our destiny is anchored to the ultimate. Who can establish the outcome of our history? Out of the wonder we came, into the wonder we shall return. On page 56, Ki Le'olam Chasto, the great Hallel, you're asked to rise. If you don't have the Machzor, perhaps you can learn the phrase Ki Le'olam Chasto, which means God's love fills the universe, and God's love is as eternal as all time and beyond. Ki Le'olam Chasto. Ki Le'olam Chasto. Ki Le'olam Chasto. Ho du l'Adonai ki tov, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Ho du l'Elohim, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Ho du l'Adonai Adonim, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Lo say niflo g'lo levado, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Lo say Hashemayim bitvuna, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Lo rakaret salamayim, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Lo serim gedolim, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Et hashemesh lemem shel bayom, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Et hayarech v'chochamim shel balayla, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Lo makei mitzrayim b'choreim, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Vayotzei Yisrael mitocham, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Bi'ad Chazakav Yisrael Netuya, Ki Le'olam Chasto. Legozer yam suf ligzarim, kili olam chasto, ve'ver yisrael b'tocho, kili olam chasto, v'nier par v'chelev yam suf, kili olam chasto, l'molechem al b'midbar, kili olam chasto, l'makem lachim gedolim, kili olam chasto, v'yarog melachim adirim, kili olam chasto, l'sechon melech amorei, kili olam chasto, u'liog melech habashan, kili olam chasto, v'notarna tzem l'nachala, kili olam chasto, nachala Yisrael avdo, kili olam chasto, shebeshifleinu zachar lanu, kili olam chasto, v'yifrekenu mitzorenu, kili olam chasto, no ten lechem l'chol basar, kili olam chasto, hodu leil hashamayim, kili olam chasto, yai dai da 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 da, kili olam chasto, yai dai da 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 da, kili olam chasto. It's also Shabbos, and on page 58, you may be seated. The Psalm for Shabbat on the English side. A song for Shabbos. It is good to thank you, Adonai, to sing your praise, exalted God, to affirm your love each morning and your faithfulness in the night, to the music of the lute and the melody of the harp. Your creation, Adonai, gives me joy. I sing of your handiwork. How vast your works, Adonai. Your designs are wonderfully intricate. The thoughtless cannot comprehend, the foolish cannot fathom this. The wicked flourish like grass, and those who commit evil blossom only to be destroyed in the end. But you, Adonai, are supreme forever. Surely your enemies, Adonai, surely your enemies shall perish. Those who commit evil shall crumble. And you will raise my head high like the horn of the ox, anointed me with fragrant oil. Stop. In the ancient days, 3,000 years ago, who was anointed? King or queen, the Kohen, an English priest, prophet. King, priest, or prophet. Monarch, priest, or prophet. For the psalm for Shabbos to say, you are anointing me with fragrant oil, is giving us the message that in terms of Shabbos, each one of us is considered to be a queen or a king, a Kohen, or a Navi, a prophet. We're beginning a brand new year. I want you to think of this every single Shabbos. If nothing else, every Saturday morning, I want you to get up and say, God made me a queen, a king, a priest, and a prophet. And how will you feel for the moment that you remember that every single Shabbos morning? The bottom stanza in the Hebrew or the English. Tzadik tamar yifrach ke'erez balvanon yizkeh shetulim bebeit Adonai bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yenovon beseva Tishenim verananim yiyol hagid ki ashar Adonai suri v'lo avlatabo. On page 60, the Ashrei. We've been learning the Ashrei a few sentences at a time because it's by heart. Many people don't have the prayer book in front of them. So today we're going to do Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, ol yalucha selah. Ashrei ham shekachalo, Ashrei ham sharonoi Elohav. Tehillah leDavid, aromimcha Elohai hamelech, va'avarcha shimcha leolam va'ed. B'chol yom avarcheka, va'ahalala shimcha leolam va'ed. Gadol Adonai molol mod, Ligdulato en cheker. The very last line on the English side. The eyes of all look hopefully to you, and you provide them nourishment in due time. It doesn't say the eyes of Jews, the eyes of Israelites, the eyes of all. Time and again, our prayer book reminds us that we are an essential part of all humanity, and all humanity is connected to us. Being Jewish does not mean being separated from the rest of humanity and the rest of the world. Being Jewish means being rooted in our traditions, our time, our calendar, our holidays, our framework, our prayers, our ceremonies, our value system, and our morality. But it also means to be propelled out into the world, to interact with the world, to make a difference. V'anachnu nevarech Yah me'atav yad olam. Hallelujah. Page 63. Yalla 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 la 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 yalla 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 la 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 yalla yalla la la yalla la la yalla yalla la la yalla la la hallelujah 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 hallelujah, 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 el bekacha, hallelujah, berkei auza, hallelujah, begvaratav, hallelujah, kerov gula, yalala, 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 yalala. Yalla la yalla la 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 hallelujah beteka shofar hallelujah benevel vechinar hallelujah betofu machol hallelujah bemenim ve'ogav yalla la yalla la yalla la yalla la yalla la 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 yalla la yalla la yalla la yalla la yalla la 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 hallelujah betziltzalei Shema, hallelujah, betziltzalei Trua, kolat Shema, hallelujah. Hallelujah, yalla 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 la 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 yalla 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 la 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 yalla yalla la la yalla la la yalla yalla la la yalla la la. This section of the service leads us up to what's called Shacharit. The early part of the service is Psukei de Zimra, literally verses of singing, of song. And in a moment we're going to transition. In a moment we're going to welcome our guest Cantor, Dr. Howard Horowitz. He'll be joining us for the Hamelech in just a moment on page number 69. And we're grateful to Dr. Horowitz for joining us. We're all modifying our schedules and our protocols because of COVID-19. And Dr. Horowitz is with his wife, Karen, whom we've met the past couple of years, and their 2 children. But he's joining us. He's participating with us. He's part of our minyan, and he's helping lift us up with his love of davening and his desire to elevate our presence and our tefillah. So we'll turn in a moment to page number 69, and we're grateful again to welcome our Cantor, Dr. Howard Horowitz. The Hamelech, which means this is our doorway into being in the presence of the sovereign of the universe. Hamelech on page 69.
v'nisa shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv ranenu tzadikim b'Adonai laisharim navatehila b'fi yesharim titramam u'v'divrei tzadikim titparach ובלשון החסידים תתקדש, ובקרב קדושים תתהלל. ובמקהלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל, ברינה יתפרשים חמקנו בכל דור ודור. שכן אקח כל חובת כל היצורים לפניך, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei Avotenu v'Imotenu, להודות להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, להלל ולקלס, על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות, דוד בן ישי, עבדך משיחך. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ, כי לך נועד עלינו ולאבותינו ויותר ששבחה וזמרה וממשלה, נצח גדולה וגבורה תהילה ותפארת קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודות מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אלוהי העולמים.
On page 70, the Yishtabach is one of a number of points of ever-increasing emphasis within the liturgy. And I want you to think about the phrase we just concluded, the preliminary service, about to start the main service, Chatzi Kaddish and Borchu. Habocher b'shirei zimra. God is described here as wanting to pay attention to singing. It's in the prayer book. By the way, it's every single day, but especially on Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah. God chooses to pay attention to our singing. So please, folks, I know in your own homes, and it might sound a little strange. Can't be stranger than David and I are being here in an almost empty sanctuary. But we need to sing together. Chatzi Kaddish on page 70.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבו וילמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ויומכון וחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבו מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילא לעילא מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ויאמרו Amen.
Eyes for a moment. The Borchu, it's on page 71, and the Borchu, which is just a two-line, it's Borchu and then Baruch, is traditionally calling us to stand up. Why? To get ready for the Shema. And in a few moments we'll be singing the Shema together. The Shema can be seated. But to get ready for the prayer that we are allowed to be seated for, the Shema, we have to stand up and get ready. That's the Borchu. The Borchu on page 71.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Evad. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Olam Yotzar Chayim, Orot Meofel Amar Avayehi.
We are seated, turning now to page 75, page 75 on the English side. In the center of the page, the Ophanim and other holy beings rise up, and opposite the Seraphim, fiery angels, they loudly proclaim their praise. I love this poem. It's a one-liner, and it's based upon a piece in the book of Isaiah. And there are different kinds of angels, and they're flashing across the heavens, and they're all calling out to each other about how glorious it is to be in the presence of God. And so when we're singing this, and just in a little while after the Shema and the Amidah, we're doing the Kedusha together, we are seeing ourselves through the lens of the prayer book as being within the company of angels. Angels are right next to us. The last line on the English. Cause a new light to shine on Zion, and may we all soon be worthy of its illumination. Baruch atah Adonai, creator of lights. On page 76, the English paragraph, prior to the very bottom, which will be in Hebrew, the English paragraph entitled Second Bracha before the Shema, God's Great Love. You have loved us deeply, Adonai, our God, and shown us boundless compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, for the sake of our ancestors who trusted in you and whom you taught the laws of life, be gracious to us as well and instruct us. Compassionate Creator, care for us. Allow our hearts to understand and discern, to hear, study, and teach, to observe, fulfill, and perform with love all the teachings of your Torah. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah. Attach our hearts to your mitzvot. Unify our hearts to love and revere your name so that we never lose hope. As we trust in your great, holy, awe-inspiring name, we will delight and rejoice in your deliverance. And if you have a tallis, we gather the four corners together as our cantor begins with Vahabienu, reminding us to reach out and to bring other Jewish people together, especially in these very strange times. Other Jewish people are only as far away as the extension of our own hand. Vahabienu, the bottom of 76.
Vahavienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz v'tolichenu kamiyut le'artzenu ki el poel yeshuotata uvanu v'acharta mikol am v'lashon וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת, להודות לך ולייחדך ביבוא. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל be'ava.
In Shema, the top of page 77, Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Voed Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavcha V'chol nafshecha V'chol miodecha Ve'hayu Advarim Ha'eleh Asher Anochi Mitzavecha Hayahom Al Levavecha Vishinantam Levanecha V'dibarta Bam V'shivtecha B'veitecha U'velachtecha V'aderech U'v'shochbecha U'v'kumecha U'kshartam Leoto Yodecha V'hayu Letotafot Peinenecha U'chtavetam Al Mezuzot Beitecha Uvisharecha. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Lemor Edaber el Bnei Yisrael v'yamarta alayhem v'yasu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem adoratam v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf betil tachelet v'haya lachem letzitzit uritem oto uzachartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam V'lo ta'turu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'hitem kedoshim le'elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim v'hiyot lachem le'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem emet.
On the English side, page 78, the next to last paragraph. Truly, the God of the universe, our sovereign, is the protector of Jacob and the shield of our deliverance. In each generation, God is present. God's name endures. God's throne is established. And God's sovereignty and faithfulness abide forever. God's teaching is living and enduring, truthful and beloved throughout all time. As our ancestors accepted it as incumbent on them, we accept it as incumbent on us, our children, and all the future seed of the house of Israel who serve you. Whether in ancient time or in future time, it is a good, enduring teaching, a constant truth, never changing principle. Mi Chamocha will be on the top of page number 80. Who else could be like God? The answer, of course, is there could be nothing else like the one and only, beyond the beginning and past all endings, the one and only Adonai. Mi Chamocha, the top of page number 80.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar v'kodesh, nahara tehilot ha'sefer. Shira chadasha, shibchu golim l'shimcha al sfat hayam, yachad kulam hoduvim lichu v'yamru, Adonai imlahoch le'olam evohed. Tzur Yisrael ekuma bi'ezrat Yisrael ufedei chinumecha Yehuda v'Yisrael. Go aleinu Adonai tzivot shemo kedosh Yisrael. Baruch Ato Adonai Gal Yisrael.
If so able, you are asked to rise for the Amidah, pages 81, 82, and part of 83, and thereafter a few moments of silence. We begin aloud, and then we pause and continue in silence. It is the community which sings that escorts us all into a few moments of silent prayer, beginning aloud on 81, 82, and 83. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'le'avoteinu v'imoteinu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'konei HaKol V'zocher Chasei Avovimot Umevi Goel Linevnehem Leman Shmo V'Yavah Misor Chachamim Unevonim Umilamed Ad Mevinim Eftechafi Bitfil Avtachanunim Lachalot Ulchanein Pnei Melech Malchem Lachim Parnei Aronim Zochreinu L'chaim Melech Chafetz B'chaim V'chotveinu V'sefer HaChaim L'mancha Elohim Chaim Melech Ozer Fokenu Mashiach Magen Baruch Atarai Magen Abraham Ufokei Tzara Atagibor, the Alamanoi, Mechayim Eitim Atarav Mechakel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayim Eitim Rachamim Rabim, Somek Noflim Rofecholim, O Matiru Asurim, O Mechayim Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Bagvorot, O Meida Melach, Melech Meimito Mechaye, O Matzmeach Yeshua, Michamocha Varachamim, Zocher Yitzurav, Lechayim Berachamim, Berachamim, V'ne'amana Talachayom Eitim, Baruch Atarai, Mechayei HaMeitim. Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Etzion, L'dor v'ador, Hallelujah. Ve'ata kadosh Yoshev, Tehilot Yisrael, Tehilot Yisrael, Eldad. And it's our tradition on page 83 for a bit of English prior to the Kedusha. And again, if you have a mouser, please join in the center of page number 83. You are our God in heaven and on earth, powerful and revered, celebrated by multitudes. You spoke and the world came to be, commanded and it was created. Your name endures forever. You are eternal. Perceiving perfectly, you dwell in secret. Crowned with salvation, you are attired in righteousness. Wrapped in zeal and armed with retribution, urging uprightness, you counsel with faithfulness. Your actions are truthful, righteous, and just. You are close to those who call honestly. Though elevated and exalted, you dwell in the heavens and suspend the earth in space. You live and endure, revered, exalted, and holy. Kedusha is on page number 86. And again, we return to that compelling theme that each one of us, in his or her own space, in his or her own mindset, is within the company of angels who are calling out to the entire universe about the majesty of being close to God. Kedusha, page 86.
ובכן ולך לקדושה כי אתה אלוהינו מלך נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום ככתוב על יד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך על הארץ כבודו אז בקול רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים קול מתנשאים לעומת צרפים לעומתם ברוך יאמרו ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו ממקום חמלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך מתי תמלוך בציון בקרוב בימינו לעולם ועד תשכון תתגדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך לדור ודור לנצח נצחים ועינינו תראינה מלכותך כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך על ידי דוד משיח צדקך ימלוך אדוני לעולם על ציון לדור ודור Hallelujah.
In a moment, Danielle and Josh Eisen will be joining us with Ledor Vador. It's a phrase known to many. Ledor means to one generation, Vador means in the next. So we might say to the generation to generation or from generation to generation. The essence of Ledor Vador, which comes out of this prayer, is the sense of continuity that each generation is building for the next generation, and we're not lost when the next generation grows, for we are part of the next generation. Each generation yields and goes further through the productivity and the contributions of the successive, Ledor Vador.
Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagid God Lecha, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Kedushatcha Nagdish.
Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagid Golecha, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Kedushatcha Nagdish. Shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamash le'ovad, ki amalek gadol, v'kadosh
Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagid God Lecha, Ulenetzach Netzachim, Ulenetzach נצחים קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד כי אל מלך גדול כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה לדור ודור לדור ודור לדור ודור נגיד גודלך ולנצח נצחים ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש.
Baruch Adonai.
Baruch ubaruch shemo.
Ahel HaKadosh. HaKadosh.
Amen.
In a moment, V'tayr Libenu on page 89, but first a thought. Every year, there descends and radiates a new and renewed light that has never yet shone. For the light of every year emerges from its source, the Infinite One, beyond all time. V'tayr Libenu on page 89.
Atahu Eloheinu Bashamayim uvaretz Gibor v'naratz Dagu mervava Husach vayehi V'tziva
V'tayr Libenu v'chemet Ki atalei me'emet v'chemet v'chemet Baruch Adonai Melech al kol haaretz, Mekadesh HaShabbat v'Yisrael. Melech al kol haaretz, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Melech al kol haaretz, Mekadesh HaShabbat v'Yisrael. V'yom HaZikaron. On page 90, prior to Sim Shalom in a moment, one of the most heartfelt of all of our prayers at this season of the year. It's the lower stanza at the bottom on the English side. And inscribe all the people of your covenant for a good life. Uchatov l'chaim tovim kol b'nei britecha. May all that lives thank you always, and praise your name faithfully forever, O God, of our deliverance and help. Baruch atah Adonai, whose name is goodness, and to whom praise is fitting. Sim Shalom in a moment on page 91. It's the prayer calling forth, put Shalom into this world, O God. And that always speaks to me deeply, especially because it's within this little paragraph, which we say every single morning of the year, that we find the words, Ahavas Chesed, the name of our shul. It's our prayer, Sim Shalom, God, put peace and a love of doing kindness into our world. Sim Shalom, it's on page 91.
Sim Shalom Tovah uveracha Chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu v'ale kol Yisrael. Amecha. Baruchenu Avinu Avinu Kulanu Kulanu Ki Echad Kulanu Ki Echad Ki Echad V'yar Panecha Ki v'yar Panecha Natata Lanu Adonai Eloheinu Torat Chaim v'yavat chesed v'yavat chesed Utzedaka uvracha v'rachamim v'chaim v'shalom Sim shalom tova v'racha Chen v'chesed v'rachamim Aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael Amecha V'tov b'einecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol eit u'b'chol sha'ah v'shalomecha.
B'Sefer Chaim.
B'Sefer Chaim bracha v'shalom U'farenas Tovah Nizacher v'nikatev lefanecha Anachnu v'chol amcha beit Yisrael L'chaim tovim u'l'shalom Baruch atah Adonai Oseh hashalom.
Amen. The full Kaddish, as we prepare for the abbreviated Torah service, full Kaddish is on page 94.
Yitkadav yitkadav shemei rabbah Yilmad yivrach yirtev yamlich malkutei V'chayechon u'yamechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael V'agalav izman karim v'imeru Amen. Yishmei rabbah mevarach V'yalam olol me'al mayam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnasei Yitadar, Yitala, Yitalal, Shemei de Kudusha.
Brichu.
Le'ela, Mikol, Nirchata, V'shirata. Mishpachata, V'nechamata, Tamiran, V'alma, V'yimeru. Yikabal, Tzlatar, U'rotan, D'chol Yisrael, Kodam, Avuhon, D'vishmaya, V'yimeru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, V'yimeru. Amen. Said Shalom Pimrama. Uyaseh Shalom. Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'yimeru. Amen.
And now we turn to page 96. And as I said, it's going to be an abbreviated Torah service because we do not have a minyan in the building. But we will take out one Torah. These past 7-8 months, David Smith has been volunteering. He has invested uncountable hours, contributed from his heart, his skill and his expertise with equipment and live streaming, first on Facebook and on YouTube, Shabbos services and other services as well, and now high holidays. And David and I are alone in the sanctuary, but we're not actually alone because you're part of us. And in a moment, on page 96, we'll have Ein Kamocha and Vahibin Soa, and then David will take the Torah out, and we'll have a modified abbreviated Torah service. As long as Jews continue to share Torah in one way or another, within a group will be alive and flourishing. When Jews cease to share Torah, I don't want to consider that possibility. Ein Kamocha on page number 96, the Torah service.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai v'ein k'masecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimlach le'olam va'ed Adonai oz le'amo yiteh Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom Avarach ha'amim Eitiva virtzoncha et Tzion Tivenecha mot Yerushalayim Kivecha levad batachnu Melech el ram v'nisa Adon olamim.
If you can and so able in your own homes, please rise as we open the ark. It's by heaving so in the middle of page number 96. David? Use it by heaving so.
Vayihi bin so Aaron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha, ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, Udevar Adonai miYerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'ama Yisrael Ikdushato.
In a moment, the top of page 98, prior to the Be'an Arachetz by our Shliach Tzibur, I put my trust in God and I utter praise to God's holy, precious name. May it be your will that you open my heart to your Torah, that you fulfill the desires of my heart and the hearts of all your people Israel for goodness, for life, and for peace. And we say, Amen. Be'an Arachetz, the top of 98.
Be'an arachetz v'lishmei kadisha, kadisha yakira, anai martush bepon, yehi rava kadama, detiftach libi v'yoraita, v'tashli mishalin delibi, Veli badechol amach Yisrael letavu lechayin veli shlam. Amen.
And David? Take that Torah out, please. And now we echo. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo. Galul Adonai Tirama Shmayachtav Cha Adonai Hagedula V'Agevora V'Tiferet V'Anetzach V'Ahod Kicho B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz Kicho B'Shamayim U'Va'aretz Cha Adonai HaMamlacha V'Minaseh L'Chol Rosh Romemo Romemo Adonai Eloheinu Ve'ishtachavu Ve'ishtachavu Le'adam Raglav Kadoshu Romemo Romemo Adonai Eloheinu Ve'ishtachavu Ve'ishtachavu Le'ahar Kodsho Le'ahar Kodsho Ki Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Shkoyach. Thank you, David. If you have a Machzor, the Torah reading will be on page 100. If you have a Chumash, the Torah reading will be on page 113. Again, just the first paragraph. 113 in the Chumash, in the Machzor, page 100. Pardon me. I apologize. Pardon me. Just the first paragraph. Today is Shabbos. And if you know the description in the book of Breshit, in English people call it Genesis, that God is described as working for 6 days, and then God rested on the seventh day. And Shabbos is that sense of rest. Some people think, oh, that's just a children's story. I take it very seriously. In fact, I build my life upon that account, that description. That it's much more than a story, that description. Because conveyed by that message from Breshit, from Genesis, is the understanding that it's important to contribute to the world in which you and I dwell. We are supposed to work and be productive and fulfilling and contributing 6 times as much as we don't. 6/7 of our energies and of our lives should be devoted to making a difference in our world. But then 1/7 of our perspective, our focus, and our time should be to step back and reflect and evaluate, and to judge that what we did makes a difference and is satisfying and an enhancement. That's a very adult and sophisticated perspective on life. Wouldn't you agree? So that's Shabbos in a nutshell. Rosh Hashanah, in a nutshell, is the anniversary of the creation of all time and all place. So here we have Shabbos coinciding with Rosh Hashanah, and you would think that we would read something from the very beginning of Breshit, of Genesis. Pardon me one more time. Excuse me. But that's not the case. We don't read about the description of the creation of the universe. We read about a family. And it's not the extensive family of Jacob with 4 wives and 13 children. It's a husband and a wife and no child and a nephew. And we're not even sure if the nephew is... We're not even sure if the nephew is in the picture. So this picture of a family, which gains our focus on Shabbos Rosh Hashanah, is what you and I might consider a nearly incomplete family. I wonder why, for the past 2,300 or so years, we've been reading on Rosh Hashanah and maybe on Shabbos Rosh Hashanah a description of a family which seems to be incomplete or lacking, or you might say nowhere near our desired picture of a family. And I answer my own question by saying that through looking at one family, a family, we have a glimpse of a world. Go back in your mind's eye and in your memory to the very beginning of Breshit, of creation of Genesis, and we have one individual and then we have a couple, and that is all, and that's how the world begins. It's not an accident that the early creation of the world's population is through the description of one person and then a couple, and also that the creation of the people of Israel, namely us, is through the view of one man and then one woman, and eventually a nephew who is or is not really part of the people, and then eventually a child. And you know very well our Jewish value on the significance of one life. One life equals an entire world, for all the beauty and all the potential therein. So on this Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah, we read just a little bit about a family, and that's to elevate our perspective and our awareness of each one of us within her or his own family, and also the family of humanity. The first Aliyah. V'Adonai pakarat tzara kasher amar v'yas Adonai l'tzara kasher diber v'tahar v'til tzara l'Avram ben l'zkunav l'moed asher diber to Elohim v'yikra Avram et Shem beno anolo asher dalo Sarah Yitzchak v'yamal Avram et Yitzchak beno ben Shemona yomim kasher tzivah to Elohim. We're not going to read the entire Torah passage, but I do want to share a thought. And as we go through the passage, pardon me, we had a bit of a wrinkle with our technology, which reminds us that we're always vulnerable. No matter how much planning we put into play and into place, something may not work. That's what happens. So we appreciate your forbearance, and it's something that obviously all of us can understand. And there are some members of our shul who may still not have any electricity. And how are they doing? And so please, if you can, and if you're in contact with other people in the shul, and your neighbors as well, reach out to them and find out how they're doing and what they need and how we can help them. Because things don't always work according to our best laid intention. But now I do want to go back to just a few thoughts on the Torah reading. Avram and Sarah now have a child. The son is Isaac. Prior to Isaac's being born, you remember that Avram had taken his wife's, that's Sarah, advice and married Hagar. And Hagar, of course, became the mother of Ishmael. So Avram has 2 wives, initially one firstborn named Ishmael, and now Isaac, another firstborn. Avram has 2 firstborns. Hagar is the mother of the firstborn Ishmael. Sarah is the mother of the firstborn of Isaac. And Sarah cannot handle having the other boy, Ishmael, in the household. And so she comes to Abraham and she says, it's time for Ishmael and Hagar to leave. And Abraham is very distressed over this. And he and God have a bit of a conversation. And God says, do that which your wife advises. We know there are occasions in our lives when husbands and wives, spouses and partners are not entirely in agreement. And we know there is conflict and tension within households. I think there's a grand message here that in some way spouses or partners need to stand by each other even when they're faced with a very difficult decision to make, one of nearly catastrophic proportions, sending a child, a stepchild, away for the betterment of this part of the family is something that nobody should ever experience. Maybe the Torah is recognizing that crises do occur within families, and the Torah is saying partners, spouses, husband and wife, need to work together as best as they can, even when the outcome is going to be very, very challenging and very painful. And I want to add one final thought, and then we'll move a little bit more forward into our Haftorah and the rest of our service. Hagar has taken her son Ishmael out into the wilderness, away from the only home that she and Ishmael have ever known. Supplies have run out, and she places Ishmael underneath a bush for shade. In the Machzor, it's on page 101. It's verses 14, 15, 16. And she says in verse number 15 in the English, "Let me not look on as the child dies." And she sits away from where the child has been. She's tried to make him as comfortable as possible. All the provisions have run out. And she says a word that I've read many dozens of times, perhaps 100, perhaps more, I have no idea. But I didn't notice the word, the Hebrew, until this year. She says, al er'eh. Al er'eh. The er'eh means I will see. And the best way I can say what's grabbing in my kishkas right now is that first I've got to teach you a little bit of Hebrew grammar. And the easiest thing to say is al tir'eh, which would be a command. Don't you ever look at that again. Don't you ever see that. Don't do X. And we've all commanded people, don't you do that. And you know how forceful a command is. Don't you dare do that. But she uses a form to herself. Don't I dare do that. Don't I dare see the death of her child. She's refusing to allow herself to see. She's commanding herself to not see the death of her child. The anguish of a mother seeing a child in torment and knowing that she has no provision of any type for that child. No food, no medicine, no water, no relief supplies. The anguish of the torment of that mother is beyond compare. And so she commands herself not to even see these last breaths, these last moments of his life. None of us can imagine being in such a situation. But here we are now living in the days of COVID, where we have seen incredible numbers of people in hospital, people in nursing homes and rehab facilities and other medical facilities, or not, at home or elsewhere. And they've been beyond the potential for all care. And we are faced with our families, within our families' lives. And perhaps some of you have family members and friends who have suffered with COVID, or know people who have, with two choices. One choice is, I'm not going to allow myself to see this person suffering, and I'm going to step away just a little bit more and be away at a distance, which is what Hagar was doing. I won't allow myself because the anguish is too deep. Or the other choice, which nobody should ever need to make, is to say, yes, I will see. I can't do anything else. But at least I will keep my gaze upon this person, this family member, this friend, this human being, this member of society. And I will not avert my gaze to spare me anguish and torment. For each person is deserving of humanity and dignity and compassion. And if you and I are ever in the extreme of such a situation, then the least we can do is the greatest we can do. And that is to look, to see, and to attend. And that's a message that I am planning to hold on to in my life long after we exit this current COVID-19 quarantine experience. And that's why I think we read this passage on the beginning of our brand new year, on Rosh Hashanah, for us to learn, for us to mature, for us to respond by seeing. And now, in just a moment, we're going to have the Mi Sheberach, a prayer for healing. And in a moment, our Cantor, Howard Horowitz, will be joining us. But first, we mention the names of our loved ones prior to his joining in. And we were thinking of all of those who are ill. We were thinking of our loved ones. We were thinking of people beyond the shul. We were thinking of people across the country, across the world. We're remembering those who are fighting fires and giving their all to protect and safeguard people across many, many different communities. We're thinking of people who need to be attended to, who need to be seen. And on this Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah, we remember Lynn Hillman, Shulamit Pesha, Chanasara Bat Peshalea, Zorak Malaya, Mickey Bat Cecilia, Elalea Bat Aviva, William Levy, Monica Knight, John Houston, Joe Barton, Patty Davis, George Patinos, Murray Bradwell, Pat Cockrell, Avram Melech Ben Fega, Wendy Pfeiffer, Debbie Pfeiffer, Evangeline Maldonado, Tom Bastoni, Avi Moshe Ben Mendel, Yaakov Avram Ben Chana, Abigail bat Kobi, Eliana bat Sarimenu, Dina Tzipora bat Devor Nachama, Rivka bat Chavshulivsha, Harav Machi Tzedek ben Bracha, Ashley Hoey, Brian Claypool, Lynn Claypool, Miriam bat Bashi, Sprinza bat Bashi, Malka bat Esther Scheindel, Binyamin ben Esther, Malka bat Grace, Avram Yudah ben Gisha, Sherry, Shem Tov, Mordechai ben Zelda, and please mention some names of your loved ones in your own seats at this time. And now Mishaberach. It's on page 115 if you're choosing to follow along. Howard?
Mishaberach Avotenu Mikor HaBeracha Le'imahotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imahotenu, mikor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, a renewal of body, a renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
And now we're honored to have David join us for Hagbah. Please rise in your homes as the Torah is lifted. It's heavy. It's heavy. Slide it down. I'd say keep it closed. Yeah. I'd say keep it closed because it's heavy. Put it on your own wrist. Slide it down. Slide it down. V'zot ha'Torah asher sa Moshe livnei b'nei Yisrael. Have a seat. Al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah. Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah. Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Go ahead, David. About 2,300 years ago, we Jews added something to the Torah reading. We added something called the Haftarah, which means additional or supplemental. It's a passage from the book of Nevi'im, or Navi, the book of prophets, as we call it in Hebrew. And the goal of adding the Haftarah is to give voice to another dimension of who we are as Jews, to enhance that which we've learned from reading Torah. And so we have a passage here, and it's on page 108, and I'm going to summarize briefly, and Dan Polanski will lay a part of the Haftorah. We're abbreviating this entire experience, but we still need to remember Torah is at our core, and prophets adds to that which we need. It adds a spiritual dimension. So down will be on page 109, and you may remember that there's a man, and he's married to two women. Sounds a lot like Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. And one woman, Penina, has children, and Hannah has no children, just like the experience of Abraham with Hagar and Sarah. And there's conflict arising between the two wives in the Haftorah, just as there's conflict and tension arising between Sarah and Hagar in the Torah reading. Things tend to recur. But what we don't have in the Torah reading is what we find in the Haftorah that Dan will chant in just a moment. And Dan will begin on the top of page 109. Hannah is the woman who hasn't had any children, and she wants a child. And so she goes to the tabernacle to pray, and she's all by herself. And as you see at the top of page 109, she's all alone as she's just perhaps whispering or mumbling or just speaking quietly through her own tears. And the priest at the location is Eli. And Eli misjudges her. And he jumps to the conclusion that she is drunk because he doesn't understand where she's coming from. And by reading the passage on page 109, you'll learn that eventually Eli comes to an awareness. And that's what we don't have in the Torah reading between Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. We don't have that sense of coming to an awareness of where people are. We misread people. We judge people by the outside, by an expression or a look or some words or a whisper, because they are not conforming to what we expect. And now I think I understand why we read this Haftorah as we begin our new year, to remind us that we do not know what's going on inside somebody else until we can listen and understand. And once we can listen and understand to someone else, then we're able to stand next to that person. Dan, we thank you for joining us at the Haftorah, the top of page 109.
Vatidor neder vatomar Adonai tzavot imro tireh be'eni amatecha uzchartani v'lo tishkach et amatecha v'natata la'amatcha zera anashim u'netativ l'Adonai kol yimei chayav u'mara lo ya'aleh al rosho V'haya ki hirbata lihipalel lifnei Adonai ve'li shomer et piha v'chana hi medaberet al libach rak sifateha naot v'kolach lo yishamea v'yachshaveha eli lishikorach Vayomer Eli ad matai tishtakarin asiri et yenech me'alayich v'tan hina v'tomer lo adoni isha kashat ruach anochi vayayin b'shechar lo shatiti v'eshpoch et nafshi lifnei Adonai al titein et amatcha Lifnei bat bliao כי מרוב שיחי וחסי דיברתי עד הנה. ויען אלי ויאמר לכי לשלום, ואלוהי ישראל ייתן את שאלתך אשר שאלת מעמו. ותאמר תמצא שפחתך חן בעיניך ותלך. האישה לדרכו ותאכל, ופניה לא היו לך עוד. וישכימו בבוקר וישתחוו לפני אדוני, וישובו ויבואו אל ביתם הרמתה, וידע אלקנה את חנה אשתו ויזכריה לאדוני. ויהיו לתקופות הימים, ותהר חנה ותלד בן, ותקרא את שמו שמואל, כי מאדוני שאלתיו. ויעל האיש אלקנך בכל ביתו, לזבוח לאדוני את זבח הימים ואת נדרו. וחנה לו עלתה, כי אמרה לאישה עד יגמל הנער בהביותיו, ונראה את פני אדוני, וישב שם עד עולם. ויאמר לך אלקנה אישך, עשי הטוב בעינייך, שיבי עד גמלך אותו, עד יקם אדוני את דברו, ותשב האישה ותנק אל בנך, עד גמלך אותו.
We say shkoyach to Dan. And in a moment, we will rise as we prepare to return the Torah to the Aron. In just a moment, Mizmor LeDavid on page 121. But for now, in the Machzor, our prayer for the state of Israel, the bottom of page 117. Avinu Shabashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, that it may be the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace, and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. On the left-hand margin on page 177, a prayer for our country. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony, to banish hatred and bigotry, and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country. May this land, under your providence, be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen. And now turning to page 121, as we return the Torah to the Aron, Mizmor David on page 121.
Havul Adonai b'nei Elim, Havul Adonai kavod va'oz, Havul Adonai kevod shemo, Ishtachavul Adonai b'hadrat kodesh, Kol Adonai al hamayim el hakavod hirim, Adonai al hamayim rabim, Kol Adonai ba'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, vayishaber Adonai et arzei halevanon. Vayarkidem kamo egel, Levanon v'Sirion kamo ben reimin. Kol Adonai chatzev lavotesh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh, Kol Adonai yecholel hayalot, Vayechesof yeyarot uveichalo kulo omer kavod. Adonai lamabu yashav, Vayeshev Adonai melech leolam, Adonai oz liyamo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom.
And now, Ki lekach tov natati lachem, it's the last four lines. It's the line just before Eitz Chaim on page 123, Ki lekach tov, the Torah has been returned to the Aron.
Ki lekach tov natati lachem, Torati al tazovu, Eitz Chaim hi, lama chazikim ba, v'tomecha meyushar deracheha, darchei noam, v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem.
We are seated. Many of you brought pictures to the shul. I thank you. To look into a camera's unblinking and unresponsive eye becomes empty and tiresome. But now I see you because your pictures are here. And a little bit of you is with me, with us. I'm looking into your eyes, and I hope you can see into my eyes, because it's Rosh Hashanah. And on this, the creation of the universe, we need to reconnect with each other. We need to remember who we are. In these extraordinary times, we need to pause and remind ourselves of your value. For you are irreplaceable. You are handmade by God, and it is the union of your physique and your soul which defines you. Your unique body and your one-of-a-kind spirit. Never before and never again will there be a you. Jewish theology, in my mind, would reject the science fiction notion of a doppelganger, an exact duplicate. You are the only. And on Shabbos, you are made all the more only. For we Jews believe we are granted an additional soul, a neshama yetera, a second Shabbos soul, a doubled soul. I think of the soul as a small mirror reflecting a bit of God. And during my ordinary schedule, I reflect God in certain ways. But on Shabbos, you and I have a doubled soul, a doubled power, a doubled capacity to reflect and to glow, like the moon's beautiful glow mirroring the much larger and more powerful sun. You and I, with our souls, reflect God, God's beauty, and God's power. These past 7 months, we have lived nearly in isolation. Many of us literally not leaving the house except for groceries, held in check out of our desire to safeguard ourselves and protecting others. We've been isolated. Until Rabbi Scott Kramer of Montgomery invited us all to join Havdalah. And a community of people has come into being, a group of new friends. We've laughed together, we've sung together, we've prayed together, we've become comfortable and vulnerable enough to cry together on Havdalah. Heartbroken, we have witnessed numbers of deaths rising to unbelievable heights. We have cried and consoled through the internet. And this additional soul, normally inclined to hasten back to God's realm quickly, has tarried a bit, reluctant to leave the enveloping embrace of emerging sacred friendship across Alabama's internet. Seeing people joyously coming together has lifted us, and many have been grateful for 30 minutes of ruach and shirah, song and spirit, shared by 3 guitarists, a cantor, and 2 rabbis. Last week we convened for slichas. Slichas is to get us into the mood for Rosh Hashanah. It's usually some of the greatest hits of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, with some prayers, which we read. But this year, online, we constructed an entire musical slichot. Some traditional and many contemporary pieces. We were going to sing slichas. We were very excited. As we kindled the Havdalah candle to illuminate the path home for 40 plus additional souls, some cruel intruders entered the Zoom Havdalah and shouted hurtful, wicked things, vile words, which I will never repeat. In a space reserved for contemplation and meditation, 40-plus Jews and their families across the state and beyond were verbally and emotionally assaulted. We managed to leave the Zoom meeting. I'm very proud of Rabbi Scott Kramer. It was very distressing, very emotional. But he managed to end that meeting and open a new meeting, and we came in, and when 2 or 3, again, thugs came into the Zoom Havdalah, he removed them. And we were alone, but we were back to ourselves, and we were a restored community. And we prayed. Lumps in our throats and tears in our eyes. And I was left wondering, do we sing now? I felt timid about singing. But Turya and then Miriam and then Cantor came along, and they led us in song, and they shared their voices, and they lifted their voices, and our voices joined theirs and began to climb. As moments passed, our voices grew stronger, and our resolve was shared. And Rabbi Kramer blessed us with tears in his eyes. And then I was given the opportunity and the honor to open the small Aron HaKodesh, the small holy ark in our chapel. And people from Mobile and Dothan and Montgomery and Auburn and Atlanta and other places beyond saw our shul's Aron HaKodesh with Sifrei Torah within. And people stood and sang Avinu Malkeinu. We sang. We sang and we heard each other in a Zoom gathering where just minutes before we had been silenced. We had been overshouted by cruel and insensitive and mean-hearted people. Singing together and praying together through the hurt, in spite of the hurt, to overcome the hurt, brought a new power to Slichus. It gave us the perspective we needed. By singing together, by praying together, we grew stronger. And while temporarily isolated, we are not apart. While in our homes, perhaps in solitude, we are not alone. We are never alone. For we are daughters and sons of Devorah and Barak, Bruria and Rabbi Meir, Hannah and Shmuel. We stood at Sinai and we brought the 10 greatest words into the world. The words upon which every civilization which claims to be advanced and sophisticated and moral use as a basis. We brought these words to the world. We are the heirs of Moshe, who just said in last week's Parsha, will you love life and Tov? Tov means goodness. Will you love life and Tov? Life and goodness, or will you choose wickedness and death? And God says in just a little while thereafter, will you choose bracha, blessing, or klala, being cursed? Jewish life given to us wants to elevate the human condition. Judaism demands the betterment of the world, the ennobling of the world by imbuing every human interaction with righteousness and dignity. And when you and I fulfill the pledge made by our ancestors and by each one of us to transform the world, we, the few, the small, the 0.02% of the world, make a difference, and the world takes note. The world takes note. The past months have been a great challenge. We have suffered, being unable to gather, to embrace, to shake hands, to laugh close to each other, to stand at a grave, to enter a Shiva house. And we have been changed to be more sensitive, sensitized to the importance of gathering, sensitized to human touch, to human closeness, to seeing people beyond masks. And it may take many more months to overcome COVID-19, but the resolve we're gaining, the sense of perspective which is becoming our new focus, is the importance. It's a simple key. Always be cherished, never ignored. Always cherish, never ignore. We'll become more of what each individual soul already is. We'll be more closely attached to one another, just as those on that Zoom slichas now feel more closely attached. Do not see yourself as wanting to get back to normal. I don't want to go back to normal. I reject that phrase that I'm hearing often from friends, acquaintances, in common speech, on the TV. I don't want to go back to normal. Because if you get back to normal, you lose what you have gained. Insight into how to be more of yourself by being close to someone else, by being attuned and vulnerable and capable of sharing hope and shouldering loss. If we get back to normal, then the cruel ones who entered Havdalah have gained an upper hand. But when you see yourself as more than before COVID, then you have vanquished the cruel ones. When you see the depth of whom you are now, you have granted spiritual significance to these challenges and quarantines. See yourself as growing in response to COVID, as becoming deeper, more powerful, more understanding, more resilient, more patient. As long as we sing together, as long as we have our voices rising and being heard, we prevail. To sing joyously, sorrowfully, brokenhearted, but with gusto and confidence, propels us into our future more assuredly than any other means. For when we sing, even across the internet, we make our voices heard. And what is our best known identifier, O Israel? Shema Yisrael, listen, hear, O Israel. And in order to hear, we must proclaim, we must say something of value. And the greatest way of speaking and the greatest contribution we can make is to sing with others. Those whom we hear and those whom we do not hear but know we are singing with them. In these days of making more of ourselves, we turn to each other in a new way as part of a new and emerging type of community, a community we do not yet understand, and we will never, ever want to lose the sense of a human community. When we join each other in every possible way and we sing, we bring forth the voice which God gave us. And in so doing, we open ourselves to our own souls. We open ourselves to the souls of others. May we sing into this next year, and may we hear. May we all be blessed with a new voice in the coming year. And much is on our minds as we turn to one of the most compelling passages in the High Holiday Service, Unatana Tokef, and soon our Chazan, Dr. Horowitz, will be joining us for Unatana Tokef on page 143, if you do have a Machzer. Many are familiar with this phrase. It leads into who will live and who will die this year, who by fire and who by water. And our heads are spinning because many of us have family and loved ones across Seattle and Oregon and many places in California, of course. My sister, her family, my aunt, many cousins, many of you. We have Phyllis Stern, a member of the shul in Seattle. Minette's brother Glenn and his grown children. We have friends and loved ones all across the West. Fire. And we just came through a hurricane. And how are we to understand this? And I say that the person who wrote this, perhaps 800 to 1,500 years ago, wasn't asking a question to which he expected an answer. He was writing a poem. And we write poetry because there's a voice that needs to come out in a certain way. And he may have been writing this poem in tears because he had family. He had loved ones. And perhaps there was a firestorm or a flood or a great disease. And he was asking, and I think what he was asking was, how am I going to move forward in the coming days when it seems to me that God is silent? And I think that's how Unatana Tokef came into shul for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's not a question with an answer. It's a call. It's a plea for hope. It's a challenge to our innermost self and a challenge to God as well. And it's so much more. Unatana Tokef on page 143.
Unetane tokef kedushat hayom kedushat hayom ki hu nora v'yayom Uva tinase malchutecha ve'yikan v'chesed kisecha v'teishev alav v'yehemet emet ki atahu dayanu mochiach V'yodea v'oed v'chotev v'sofer umone v'tizkor kol hanishkachot v'tiftach et sefer hazichronot v'tiftach et sefer hazichronot u'me'elav yikareh v'chotam yad kol adam bo.
Uv'shofar gadol.
Tovah u'tefila u'tzedakah ma'avirin et roa ha'gezerah
by this poet. The only conclusion that he can put forth in his own moment, however long that moment was, of anguish when he was writing, who will live by fire and who will die through fire, who will live and who will die by flood and disease and by sword, and who will flourish and who will not, is the phrase teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah. Teshuvah means changing your innermost self for the better. Tefillah means prayer in 100 different ways of reaching outward and inward at the same time. And tzedakah means making myself attentive to the needs of others. And when I change my innermost being, and I open my heart to prayer in the fullness thereof, and I also commit myself to a life of tzedakah, I managed to navigate the uncertainty and the confusion and the fear of a fire, a flood, a hurricane, a pandemic. For God has given you and me the tools to make a difference within each and every one of ourselves personally, the person next to us, and the person far away, regardless of who he or she may be. That is why Unatana Tokef and Rosh Hashanah and Teshuvah Tefillah Tzedakah are in this machzor, on this holiest of brand new days and brand new opportunities. And because we are on the internet and things are very strange, we are adjusting the service And we're moving very quickly. And in a moment, we will be nearly concluding the service, and we'll be turning to the famous piece, Hayom Ta'amtzeinu, on page 170 in the Machzor. And I'm juxtaposing Hayom with Unatana Tokef. Because Unatana Tokef means look at the greatness of this day, and we see the conditions all around us, and they are frightening. But if we focus ourselves and draw upon the energies of each other, teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah, changing our ways for the better, sincere prayer, and tzedakah, we'll navigate the challenges before us. And now the Hayom, in just a moment, for which we open the Ark on page 170, tells us that God, you are with us, and you are giving us the courage and the resolve and the motivation to make this day, this month, this year, this world an opportunity for life, for love, and for hope. Hayom Ta'amtzeinu.
Hayom, 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 Ta'amtzeinu, amen. Hayom, 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 Tevarcheinu, amen. Hayom, 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 tegadleinu, amen. Hayom, 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 tidrashenu letovah, amen. Hayom, 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 tichtavenu lechayim tovim, amen. Hayom, 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 tikabel berachamim uvratzon et tefilateinu, amen. Hayom, 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 tishma shavateinu, amen. Hayom, 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 titmachenu bimin tzidkecha, amen.
And now the full Kaddish on page 171.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemeh Rabbah, amen. V'yalma divrach hiruteh, v'yamelich malchuteh, v'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael b'gahala, uv'izman kariv v'yimeheru, amen. Yehi shmei Rabba morach le'olam u'melmaya. Yitparach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnase v'yithadar v'yit'ale v'yithalal shemei dekudsha berichu le'yela mikol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata Da'amiron v'yalama v'yimmeru, amen. תתקבל צלותן ובאותן דכל ישראל קדם אבוהן דבשמיא וימהרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מנשמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימהרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, וימהרו אמן.
In just a moment, we will offer the mourner's Kaddish, and if you know of a loved one, please mention that person's name in your own location as we include these names, and then those so inclined rise in their own homes will rise and we'll say the Kaddish together. Bessie Friedlander, Kayla Leah Grotsky Yablonsky, Abe Sussman, Marilyn Schwartz, Tina D. Solomon, Joe Kramer, Holden Kramer, Roger Bloom, Minnie A. Miller, Leon Harold Mishkin, Julius Bloom, Ann Wiedenbaum, Abraham Miller, Max Greenberg, Lottie Voigt, Eileen Sherman, James Ward, Murray Gollum, Lillian Rudnick. Every person is equated with the world in terms of significance, who he or she is, what he or she means to others, what he or she can become. We learned last night that we lost Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg yesterday late afternoon. On Erev Rosh Hashanah, this woman who transformed the role of women as attorneys and jurists, who helped to bring a new light to dispel darkness and to illumine our understanding of how all people can and will work for justice. This woman, born of immigrants from Europe, fighting a tidal wave of opposition merely because of who she was as a female, ascended to the highest court in our land and embodied the greatest, most devoted principle of love and kindness within our Jewish tradition, that of justice for the poor, the lone, the ignored, the ill-attended. And her soul is now ascending to the heavenly court. And I'm sure putting the heavenly tribunal through its paces. May her memory be Zichrona Livracha for a blessing, along with all the memories of all of our loved ones. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba. Amen. Be'olma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zaman kariv v'meru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach La'olam Ololmei Olmaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh V'yithadar V'yitale V'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha Brichu La'ela La'ela Min Kol Berchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechamata Da'a Miran Ba'alma V'meru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Oleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'Imeru. Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Mromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Oleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'Imeru. Amen. May we all be blessed to hold on to the memories of all of our loved ones. And may we listen to those who are speaking of the loved ones. And in so doing, we will all have shalom. We're going to conclude in just a moment with the Adon Olam, and then we'll make Kiddush and Hamotzi. And if you have a glass of wine, you're invited to make Kiddush with us. The Adon Olam is on page 175 in the Machzor, or page 211 if you have the Sidur Lev Shalem, or a number of Sidurim as well, obviously. Reminders that tomorrow we have services at 10 a.m. and tomorrow the service is going to be modified a little bit. We're going to incorporate tashlik into the service. So I will be asking you to have a piece of bread, not only for hamotzi for tomorrow, but perhaps breaking off a small crumb or two. And I will ask you, and I'll mention tomorrow, have a glass of water at the ready. And I'll explain why tomorrow during Tashlich, near the end of tomorrow's service. Monday, Tanakh study is on Zoom. Tuesday, Spirit is 5 to 5:30. And the topic for Tuesday is, what happens when you fast? Because we are approaching Yom Kippur. Next Friday is Guitar Shabbat. And, folks, because we're not building a sukkah this year, it's ever more important to have a lulav. So please, a number of people have already contacted me. A lulav is actually a compilation of, you might say, 4 trees of hope. Order a lulav this year. Contact me by phone, text, email, carrier pigeon, dropping by the house, the shul, any way you want. My order is going in Monday morning. Absolute last choice. But I need to know that members of our shul have trees of hope from Israel in this community, so we can hold on to something, because we can't gather in our sukkah this year. So bring a tree of hope into your own life, and if you can't afford the $40, talk with me privately and we'll figure something out. But we need to have lulavim this year in Mobile, Alabama. So please contact me. Thank you. Adon Olam. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'ei Nasa V'cheptza Kol Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'hu Haya V'hu Oveh V'hu Yiyeh B'tifara V'oyeya b'tifara V'ho echad v'yen sheni L'ham shelo l'hakbira B'li reshi b'li tachlit V'lo oz v'hamisra V'lo oz v'hamisra V'hu eli v'chai golali V'tzor chevli b'yet tzara V'hu nisi omanosli Menad kosi b'yom ekra, menad kosi b'yom ekra, b'yado avkid ruchi b'yei tishan v'yaira, v'im ruchi gaveyati, Adonai li v'lo ira, Adonai li v'lo ira. Kiddush is v'shamru because it is Shabbos, and also one line of Tiku, and then Hagafen. V'shamro b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam barit olam B'nei Yovem b'nei Yisrael oti leolam oti leolam V'shamro b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam barit olam Ki sheshet yomim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et ha'oretz v'shamro b'nei Yisrael et hashabat la'asod et hashabat ledorotam barit olam. V'yom hashvi shavat v'yinafash Shavat vayinafash, Shavat vayinafash, v'shamro v'nei Yisrael, et ha-Shabat la'asod, et ha-Shabat ledorotam barit olam. Tiku v'chodesh shofar ba'keset liyom chagenu, Ki chok liYisrael hu mishpat l'lei Yaakov. Savri Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam borei pri hagafen. And if you have a piece of bread and perhaps a bit of honey, we'll do a quick hamotzi in just a moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. May you and your loved ones be inscribed for a sweet year, a year of sweetness and good health, a year of blessing, a year of knowledge that you are loved and you are cared for and you matter and you are significant and you are holy. May you be signed and sealed in the book of life, you and all your loved ones. And may you have blessings of shalom. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Slightly modified service, and good Shabbos and